The North Atlantic. May 16, 2014. Winds at 50 miles per hour. Seas running more than 15 feet. 4 men are somewhere in those seas. Their names are Andrew Bridge, James Mayle, Steve Warren, and Paul Goslin. They are experienced sailors on a proven boat. The boat is a Beneteau First 40.7, hull number 125, built in France in 2006. Its name is Cheeki Rafiki. 2 days later, the United States Navy finds the hull. It is floating upside down, 720 nautical miles southeast of Nova Scotia. The life raft is still in its storage bracket, untouched. The 4 men are never found. This is not a story about a freak storm. It is a story about a structural failure that the Marine Accident Investigation Branch later found on multiple sister hulls that are still in circulation on the used sailboat market today. If you have ever bought a boat or thought about buying one, subscribe to Yachts and Boats and stay with this video. The number that governs whether a hull like Cheeki Rafiki comes back upright or stays inverted is not on any broker listing you will ever receive. The Beneteau First 40.7 was not an obscure boat. More than 600 hulls were produced between 1995 and 2007. It won its class at the 1995 Whitbread Round the World Race. Its resume was impeccable. Its design came from Far Yacht Design, one of the most respected naval architecture firms on the planet. The MAIB investigation took 65 pages to explain what happened. The summary is this. Cheeki Rafiki's keel detached from the hull. When a fin keel separates from a fiberglass sailboat, the boat inverts within seconds. It does not right itself. The 4 men aboard had no warning and no time. The investigation found evidence of accumulated grounding damage in the area where the keel attached to the hull. The internal structural matrix, a grid of fiberglass reinforcements bonded inside the hull, had begun to separate from the hull skin in the area around the keel bolts. This type of separation, called matrix detachment, was not unique to Cheeki Rafiki. During the investigation, MAIB inspectors visited 5 other Beneteau First 40.7 hulls. Every single one showed matrix detachment in the areas around the keel. The MAIB noted it had received what it described as much anecdotal evidence of the same problem across the class. The construction technique at the center of this failure is common in European production boat building. Rather than integrating internal structural reinforcements into the hull during the lamination process, the older, more integrated method, modern production builders bond a prefabricated internal matrix into a completed hull using adhesive. It is faster to manufacture. Building this way costs less. It creates a boat with a beautiful interior. When the bond in the keel area fails, the hull loses the structural support that holds the keel in place. The keel does not break. It separates cleanly from a hull that can no longer contain it. Beneteau was cleared of design fault under the standards that applied when the boats were built. The operator of Cheeki Rafiki, Storm Force Coaching Limited, was convicted of breaching the UK Merchant Shipping Act. A jury was unable to reach a verdict on 4 counts of gross negligence manslaughter. The men on board were not reckless. Andrew Bridge and James Mayle were both 22 years old. Steve Warren was 52. Paul Goslin was 56. They perished on a passage that thousands of boats had completed before them because a structural problem was accumulating silently inside the hull and nobody had a system to detect it before it reached the point of no return. That is the story the yacht industry does not advertise. Number 10 on this list is the Kiwi 35. In July 2008, the Kiwi 35 named wingnuts capsized during the Chicago to Mackinac race on Lake Michigan in a violent thunderstorm near Charlevoix. Skipper Mark Morley, 51, and crew member Suzanne Makowski-Bickle, 41, were lost. 6 crew survived. U.S. Sailing's investigation found that the boat's sail area was too large for its weight under the conditions of an overnight race in an area known for sudden violent weather. The investigation concluded that Wingnuts was, in their words, an inappropriate boat for a race of this duration. Number 9 is the Sydney 38. On April 14, 2012, the Sydney 38, named Low Speed Chase, was racing in the full-crew Farallones race out of San Francisco Bay. The crew of 8 rounded close to the Farallon Islands and crossed a 4-fathom shoal in a 25-knot northwest wind. A set of large breaking waves capsized the boat and drove it onto the rocks. 5 of the 8 crew perished: Mark Kassanen, Jordan Fromm, Elmer Morrissey, Alexis Bush, and Alan Cahill. Low Speed Chase had a stability index of 119 to 120 degrees. The minimum recommended for serious offshore sailing is 120 degrees. That 1 degree below the minimum was not the primary cause. The U.S. Sailing Review Panel attributed the capsize primarily to the course sailed across a known shoal, but the stability number sits in Appendix B of the official report, 1 degree below the floor, as a quiet annotation. 5 families carry that annotation. Number 8 is the Bavaria 390. In May 2013, a Bavaria 390 lost its keel 650 nautical miles northeast of Bermuda while on passage from St. Martin to the Azores. The 2-man Danish crew was rescued from a life raft by a Finnish naval vessel. The keel was gone. The Bavaria 390 joins a documented list that the International Sailing Federation has been building since 2008, 72 confirmed keel loss incidents between 1984 and 2013, resulting in at least 24 confirmed fatalities. The ISAF notes that the number does not include boats that simply vanished at sea without survivors to file a report. Number 7 is the Bavaria Match 42. In 2005, a Bavaria Match 42 lost its keel when the internal structure pulled through the bottom of the boat. The crew escaped. The hull did not. The Bavaria Match 42 joins the growing evidence after 2000 that the construction method used across a wide range of European production sailboats, bonding an internal structural matrix into a glass-reinforced plastic hull, creates a structural vulnerability when the hull is grounded, even lightly, and even without visible damage. Number 6 is the Beneteau 311. Its capsize screening formula score is 2.14. That number requires a full explanation because it is the most important number in this entire video, and it appears on no broker listing you will ever see. After the 1979 Fastnet Race disaster, the United States Yacht Racing Union and the Society of Naval Architects and Marine Engineers spent 5 years studying what conditions capsized boats and what hull characteristics helped them survive. Their conclusion took the form of a formula. The capsize screening formula, CSF, equals the beam of a boat divided by the cube root of its displacement in cubic feet. A score of 2.0 or below indicates a hull considered safe for offshore use. Above 2.0, the hull fails the post-Fastnet standard that the racing establishment itself developed after 21 people perished in a single storm. The displacement in cubic feet is the boat's weight in pounds divided by 64. You take the cube root of that number. Then you divide the boat's beam in feet by that result. The calculation takes 90 seconds with a standard calculator. It requires 2 numbers, the displacement and the beam, both of which appear on every production boat spec sheet ever published. That puts the Beneteau 311 at 2.14 on the CSF. It is actively listed on the used market, in listings that describe it as a capable coastal cruiser. The listing does not mention the CSF score. No law requires it to. Number 5 is the Hunter 260. Its capsize screening formula score is 2.07. The Hunter 260 is a popular, affordable, widely available boat. Thousands of new sailors have started their sailing lives aboard one. A capsize screening formula score of 2.07 puts it above the post-Fastnet safety threshold by a margin that does not appear anywhere in the transaction documents a buyer signs. This is where the story pivots, because the boats on this list are not isolated manufacturing failures. They are the product of a design system that was specifically rewarded for building hulls that score poorly on stability metrics. That system was called the International Offshore Rule. The IOR was the dominant handicap rating system for offshore racing from 1969 through the early 1990s. Under the IOR, a boat's handicap, the number that determined how it was scored in competitive races, was calculated from a series of hull measurements. Designers learned quickly to exploit those measurements. The rule penalized high righting moment, the force that pulls a heeled sailboat back to vertical. A boat with deep, heavy ballast and a narrow beam had excellent righting moment. Under IOR scoring, it earned a worse handicap than a boat with wide beam and shallow, light ballast. Good stability was a financial liability under the rule. Designers responded rationally. They built wide, shallow, light hulls with low ballast to displacement ratios. Those hulls won races. They also capsized more easily in storm conditions, and critically, they tended to stay inverted once they went over. The IOR also discourages deep fin keels by measuring what is called girth differences at key points along the hull. A deep, narrow fin keel, which puts heavy ballast as far below the waterline as possible, creates unfavorable girth measurements under the formula. Designers shortened keels and raised ballast centers to improve IOR ratings. The boats got faster on paper and more dangerous in the water. Olin Stevens, the most respected yacht designer of the 20th century, described the result directly. He called a wide beam, light displacement hull with limited high-mounted ballast the worst of all combinations. He put that in writing in a formal publication analyzing the legacy of IOR design. Those hulls became the basis for a generation of affordable production cruisers sold to families throughout the 1970s and the 1980s. The same IOR influenced hull molds that produced race winners were used to manufacture the boats that filled marina slips from Fort Lauderdale to the English Channel. The ballast ratios that Stevens condemned, 28 to 32% in many IOR-era production boats, compared to the 40% minimum considered safe for offshore work, went undisclosed in every transaction. An older boat built to the CCA rule that preceded the IOR typically carried 50% of its weight as ballast, placed at a keel depth of 2 meters or more. By the mid-1970s, the average IOR-derived production cruiser had dropped to 32% ballast at a depth under 1.8 meters. That difference is invisible at the dock and catastrophic in a breaking sea. Those boats are still out there. They are on Yacht World right now. Many are listed as offshore capable. Their capsize screening formula scores are not in the listing. The ballast to displacement ratios that Stevens described as the worst combination are not in the listing. The 1979 Fastnet Race proved what those numbers meant in practice. On August 13, 1979, a fleet of 303 boats was racing off the southwest coast of Ireland when a force 10 to force 11. Storm struck, with sustained winds above 70 knots. 75 boats capsized, more than 100 were knocked down past horizontal. 24 boats were abandoned by their crews. 21 people perished, 15 competing sailors and 6 more on non-racing vessels caught in the same storm. The British Royal Navy conducted what was, at that point, the largest peacetime rescue operation in its history. More than 4,000 rescue personnel were deployed across 20,000 square miles of the Irish Sea. The boats that capsized and stayed inverted shared a profile. They were wide relative to their displacement. Their ballast was high relative to their keel depth. They had been designed or influenced by designs that optimized IOR handicap ratings rather than offshore stability. The boats that survived the same storm tended to be narrower, heavier, with deeper ballast and higher angles of vanishing stability. The Cruising Club of America and the USYRU formed a joint committee immediately after the race. The committee included naval architects, racing veterans, and marine engineers. It spent 5 years gathering data, running tank tests, and analyzing what the storm had proven. Its 66-page report, published in 1985, was the first systematic attempt to translate the lesson of the Fastnet into a measurable standard. The angle of vanishing stability, or AVS, is the angle past which a hull will capsize and not return upright on its own. A boat with an AVS of 120 degrees can roll until its mast is 30 degrees below the surface and still come back. One with an AVS of 100 degrees inverts before the mast reaches horizontal. Once inverted, a low AVS hull has very little tendency to right itself. The 1985 report found that boats with a stability range under 120 degrees can remain inverted for up to 2 minutes. 2 minutes is a long time when you are trapped inside a fiberglass hull in 55-degree water. Number 4 is the Catalina 315. Its capsize screening formula score is documented above 2.0 in multiple technical forum analyses. The Catalina 315 is one of the most widely purchased production cruisers in the American market. It appears in broker listings across the country, described as an ideal coastal cruiser and a perfect family boat. Its stability numbers are not in the listing. A buyer who wants them must know to look for them, know where to find them, and know how to interpret the result, none of which a broker is required to explain. The data exists. Sailboatdata.com carries capsize screening formula figures for hundreds of production boats. US Sailing maintains a database of GZ curves, the full stability profile for member access. The GZ curve tells you not just whether a hull will capsize, but at what angle it becomes unstable and how quickly it returns upright if it does. Most buyers sign a purchase agreement without ever seeing either number. Which leads to number 3. Any production boat built in the 1970s or early 1980s under IOR influence, currently listed on the used market as blue water capable, without a published stability profile attached to the transaction. That is not one boat. Thousands of hulls qualify. Their post-Fastnet condemnation was not a secret. The 1985 USY-RUSNA-ME report was published. The capsize screening formula was public. Production of these hulls continued for years afterward, and they have been changing hands on the used market ever since. The buyers do not know what the sellers received in those transactions. The sellers did not know what the designers built into those hulls. The designers were following a rating rule that rewarded the instability. The rule rewarded it because beam and light displacement made boats faster on paper, and fast ratings sold entries to races, and race entries generated the prestige that sold production boats to the public. The financial logic ran from designer to rulemaker to manufacturer to broker, with the buyer at the end of the chain absorbing a structural risk that nobody in that chain was required to disclose. The surveyor is worth a closer look here. The buyer hires the surveyor. The buyer pays for the survey. The survey is meant to protect the buyer, but the surveyor is typically recommended by the broker. The broker earns a commission when the transaction closes. A surveyor who flags too many problems ends transactions. One who flags too few keeps getting referrals. The MAIB investigation into Cheeki Rafiki found that its hull had survived multiple groundings before the Atlantic passage. A surveyor had inspected it. The matrix detachment was not detected until the hull was floating inverted in the North Atlantic with 4 men missing. The incentive structure of the transaction made that outcome predictable. Number 2 is the Hooligan 5. In 2007, the Hooligan 5, MAIB, a production race boat, lost its keel and capsized. 1 crew member perished. The Hooligan V was not a neglected boat. It was a maintained, actively raced vessel whose structural failure occurred in conditions the boat was designed to sail. Number 1 is the Beneteau First 40.7, not the specific hull named Cheeki Rafiki, but the class as a whole and what it represents in the used market today. The MAIB inspected 5 First 40.7 hulls during its investigation. Everyone showed matrix detachment. The MAIB received much anecdotal evidence of the same structural pattern across the class. There are approximately 600 First 40.7 hulls in existence. A search of major yacht listing platforms returns multiple examples, priced between $60,000 and $110,000, with descriptions that emphasize their racing record, their build quality, and their passage-making capability. None of those listings contain the MAIB report. None contain the matrix detachment findings. No law requires them to. The pattern is not accidental. The capsize screening formula was established in 1985. The minimum angle of vanishing stability standard was established in 1985. The International Sailing Federation Keel Failure Database was compiled by 2013. The Cheeki Rafiki MAIB report was published in 2015. All of that information exists in the public domain. None of it is in the transaction. The broker who shows you a used First 40.7 today is not required to hand you the MAIB report. The surveyor who inspects the hull is not required to check the matrix detachment areas documented in that report unless you know to ask and know how to phrase the question. Before you sign a purchase agreement for any production sailboat built before 1998, 4 numbers will tell you whether the hull has been honestly described. The Capsize screening formula score below 2.0 for offshore use. The angle of vanishing stability 120 degrees minimum for serious offshore sailing. The ballast to displacement ratio 40% or above. The design error relative to the International Offshore Rule. Any hull conceived before 1990 under International Offshore Rule influenced rules carries a structural legacy that no cosmetic refit removes. Those numbers are on sailboatdata.com and in the US Sailing Member Database. They take less time to find than the engine hours. The broker will not show them to you. The ledger does not lie. If this is the kind of investigation you want more of, subscribe to Yachts and Boats.